Picture this. It's a warm summer night in 1939. You've somehow scored an invite to an exclusive party high up in the Hollywood Hills. The cars parked outside are worth more than most houses. The chandeliers drip with light. And inside, the biggest stars on earth, mingling with politicians, newspaper moguls, and people you don't dare ask too many questions about. But somewhere in that sprawling mansion, down a velvet-lined hallway, there's a locked door. Only a chosen few are allowed past it. What happens behind it? Well, that's where the glamour of old Hollywood turns into something far darker. Tonight, we're opening that door. We're diving into the secret parties of old Hollywood gatherings that built legends, destroyed careers, and left a trail of scandals so outrageous, even the tabloids stayed quiet. Some of these stories you may have heard whispers of, but most? They were buried by studios desperate to protect their golden idols. So grab your drink, take a deep breath, and follow me. Because once you see what really happened behind those gilded gates, you can't unsee it. The parties MGM didn't want you to know about. We start with MGM, the powerhouse studio that could make or break anyone in the 1930s and 40s. The Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer logo was more than just a roaring lion. It was a warning. Step out of line, and they'd devour you. MGM was famous for throwing extravagant parties. On the surface, they were just social events, glittering showcases of star power. But beneath the laughter and champagne toasts were rooms where deals were struck, blackmail plots hatched, and careers decided with a sly whisper. One particularly persistent rumor involves Louis B. Mayer himself. As head of MGM, Mayer would host lavish banquets and after-parties at private estates. Young starlets, many barely out of their teens, were strongly encouraged to attend. Their careers often depended on it, and behind closed doors, powerful men would take their pick. A former MGM contract player once confided, decades later, that girls who resisted would find themselves with no roles, no publicity, and no future. Meanwhile, those who complied often woke up to headlines praising their meteoric rise. Coincidence? Hardly. It wasn't just sexual manipulation. MGM had private investigators who'd snap compromising photos of rivals or unruly stars. These photos were kept in secret files, ready to ruin reputations if anyone tried to break their contracts. The parties were the perfect hunting grounds for dirt. And while the press occasionally hinted at naughty goings, the real stories never made it to print. Mayer and his fixers controlled the newspapers as ruthlessly as they did the studios. Errol Flynn, behind the swashbuckle. Let's drift away from the studio lots and drop in on Errol Flynn, the ultimate bad boy of classic cinema. With his devil-may-care grin and smoldering eyes, Flynn made audiences swoon in films like The Adventures of Robin Hood. But off-screen, his parties were the stuff of legend and nightmare. Flynn's Beverly Hills home was notorious. Guests described it as part palace, part pleasure den. Every room had a stocked bar. Every hallway seemed to echo with giggles and hushed arguments. There were rumors never proven, but whispered often that Flynn kept secret passageways where guests could disappear for hours. One particularly dark rumor claimed Flynn's parties often included underage girls, snuck in by so-called talent scouts, who promised them a shot at stardom. By the time police investigated in the early 1940s, any witnesses seemed to vanish, or they'd suddenly have glowing stories of Flynn's generosity, as if coached by MGM's best lawyers. Even more chilling? Flynn's 1,943 trial for statutory rape. 2 girls testified in court. Flynn, ever charming, laughed off the accusations, turning the courtroom into his stage. His legal team demolished the prosecution's case, and he was acquitted. Fans cheered, coining the phrase "in like Flynn," a grotesque celebration of him escaping the scandal. But insiders always said that the trial barely scratched the surface. The studio had buried far worse stories, paying off families and reporters to protect one of their biggest assets. And Flynn? He went right back to throwing parties, as reckless and decadent as ever. Opium and morphine, the salons of the silent era. Now, rewind a little. Back to the 1920s, the silent era, when film stars seemed even more untouchable. In smoky mansions off Sunset Boulevard, Hush-hush gatherings were hosted by actors, directors, and wealthy patrons. Unlike the roaring jazz scenes you see in old movies, these were quieter, more languid affairs. Guests reclined on plush divans, passing around long pipes, opium, morphine. Some say even early heroin was experimented with. It was all very European, they claimed, decadent, artistic, freeing. But the aftermath was anything but glamorous. Several silent stars who frequented these dens simply disappeared from public life. Studios would announce they were traveling abroad or recovering from exhaustion, while the truth was far sadder. Some never returned to the screen, too ravaged by addiction. A film historian uncovered old diaries, hinting that more than one starlet was quietly sent back to the Midwest by family, addicted and disgraced, her dreams and career smoldering out before they could truly catch fire. And still, the parties continued. Because if there's one thing old Hollywood excelled at, it was ignoring tomorrow's consequences in favor of tonight's thrills. The dark price for starlets. But perhaps the cruelest chapters unfolded for the young women desperate to make it big. Talent scouts would roam diners, theaters, even high school plays, offering screen tests and promising introductions to powerful producers. Those introductions often came in the form of exclusive parties, dazzling, intimidating, and deeply predatory. Multiple actresses later confessed in private letters, some only discovered decades later, that they were lured into rooms where producers and executives waited, expecting more than polite conversation. If a girl refused, suddenly the contracts evaporated. Casting calls stopped coming. One former studio insider admitted it was an unspoken rule that the parties were where you sealed your fate. There's the heartbreaking case of a would-be star named Lila Jean. Barely 19, she was poised to become Warner Brothers' next big discovery. After a party at a producer's mansion, she abruptly left Hollywood, returning to Ohio and never acting again. Her family cited emotional collapse. What happened that night remains a tragic mystery, hinted at only in a handful of cryptic letters to a friend. It's these stories half lost, half whispered, that reveal the monstrous underbelly of Hollywood's golden glow. Blackmail, the invisible leash. Of course, with so much secrecy and sin packed into these parties, someone was always watching. Literally. Detectives on studio payroll would often stake out events, taking clandestine photos of actors in compromising positions, whether it was affairs, drunken brawls, or drug use. Those photos were insurance. If a star tried to jump to another studio, renegotiate contracts, or publicly criticize the hand that fed them, the studio could make sure the scandal hit front pages overnight. There's a particularly chilling file tied to Paramount from the late 1930s. It detailed an entire strategy for controlling a rebellious actor. It recommended staging a raid at a private party, making sure local police found contraband, then quietly bailing the actor out. He'd be so grateful and so terrified that he'd sign any deal they wanted. It was manipulation on a grand scale, all carried out under the chandeliers of seemingly innocent soirees. The tragic aftermath. And what about the stars who didn't survive these secret worlds? Judy Garland's struggles are legendary, but fewer people connect her downward spiral directly to these Hollywood parties. Handlers would give her pills to keep her awake, more pills to make her sleep, and whisk her from set to social event to studio dinner until she barely knew what day it was. More than once, she was seen stumbling out of parties at 3 a.m., mascara streaked, murmuring lines from a script that wasn't even her current film. By her 30s, Judy wasn't just fighting personal demons, she was crushed by a system that had consumed her youth at parties she was too exhausted to enjoy. And for every Judy Garland, there were countless lesser-known names who never even made it that far. Overdoses, abrupt disappearances, suspicious accidents. Their stories were quietly erased by studio PR teams, while the parties carried on. Conclusion: what lurks behind the curtain? So next time you see a black and white photo of a glittering ballroom filled with old Hollywood stars, pause, look closer. Because behind every polite laugh, every sparkling gown, there might have been secrets darker than we'll ever fully know. In those days, parties weren't just celebrations. They were transactions, tests, traps, sometimes even the beginning of the end. And perhaps that's why these stories still haunt us, not just because they reveal the cruelty beneath the glamour, but because they remind us how easily beauty and power can hide rot. If you found these hidden histories as shocking as I did, leave a comment below. Which story unsettled you the most? Or is there another rumor from old Hollywood you'd like me to investigate next? And if you're craving more secrets from cinema's golden age, make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell because trust me, there are plenty more scandals that the studios still hope you never hear about. Thanks for watching. Keep your eyes open and never trust the red carpet.